On today's show, one last preseason game, a dress rehearsal before the start of the regular season next Saturday.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms, including the SiriusXM app and on YouTube. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen each and every day. My name is Dan Holme. I've covered the Capitals for the last 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And the best way that you can help grow this show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about a dress rehearsal before the start of the regular season. And I think that it is going to be primarily veterans in the lineup. But one question remains, or the biggest question, I should say, remains, and that is the third line. And even to get a little bit more finite on there, the third line left wing. Who's going to be in the first game of the season? Is it going to be Vrana? Is it going to be Cristall? Or is it going to be Milano? That is a big question, and I think that a lot of those questions, that question in particular, will be answered sooner than later. But it does appear as though Andrew Cristall will be in the lineup tomorrow. So that is the biggest story to watch. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I will talk about Ethan Bear and Sgarbossa waived. What was behind that ultimately? But just to get it going here, talking about the dress rehearsal, if you will, Saturday afternoon as the Caps prepare to take on the Bruins. And I'm ready, guys. I'm going to be honest. I am ready for the start of the season. I'm not sure what the weather's like where you live, but there's a little bit of a chill in the air. I had some frost this morning, and the feeling of hockey is in the air. And, you know, when I do this show, I talk about preseason hockey, and I talk about them showing up at MedStar in August, but it doesn't feel real. Because as I look outside, then it's 80, 90 degrees in it, and hockey seems a million miles away, but it's getting real, and it feels real with that chill in the air. And I'm most excited for this season to get underway. But we'll have one last dress rehearsal before the start of the regular season. A week before their season opening game against the New Jersey Devils, the Caps will wrap up a 6-game exhibition scheduled by facing the Bruins at Capital One Arena. The Caps and Bruins previously met in the preseason in Boston, where the Bruins secured a 4-2 victory on September 24th. And again, I always talk about it's important not to read too much into the preseason games, at least the first couple games, I guess I'm going to say. But once we get to this point, the final preseason game, I think there aren't a lot of unanswered questions. There are some, but I think this is a different Capitals team than it was on September 24th. It has been a little more than 2 weeks since the Caps kicked off their 2024 training camp with almost 70 players on the roster. With Saturday's game approaching, the team still has 26 healthy players on the roster camp. However, they need to make some big cuts. They need to reduce the roster to 23 by 5 p.m. on Monday, which is the NHL's deadline for submitting opening night rosters. That is what you're going to want to watch. Circle that. Make sure and follow Locked On Capitals on your podcatcher of choice, and also on Twitter and wherever you find your podcast, as I will have you guys covered, as that is going to be the big question answered, is who makes the cut. And it's intriguing for me, as there hasn't been this amount of excitement surrounding a season for me in quite some time. Definitely something I'm looking forward to. On Saturday's preseason finale, only 20 out of the remaining 26 players, including 15 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 3 goaltenders, will be able to play. Any players cut before Monday's roster deadline must be placed on waivers by 2 p.m. Sunday to clear by 2 p.m. Monday. And in the final segment, I'll talk about 2 players that were waived today and the questions that surround those players. But talking about the preseason games strategy and roster decisions. Listen, these are not easy decisions to make. In a lot of ways, you can get it right, you can get it wrong, but it's about getting the most information you possibly can and making the most educated bet or prediction that you possibly can. Teams usually use the final preseason game as a dress rehearsal for their opening night lineup, but the Caps have a week between their last preseason game and their season opener. That's not ideal. There's a little bit of rust that might take place. I'm sure they'll be quite active at MedStar or training in a facility to make sure they are ready for the start of the season. They are still making decisions about their opening night roster and may use the last preseason game to help with these decisions. And it's tough for Sonny Milano and a lot of those players that are vying for positions. Talking about the blue line as well, Alexeyev, Dylan McElrath, those kind of players. Who makes the cut? The forward line that is causing some concern consists of 3 players who were part of last season's roster: Sonny Milano, Hendrix Lapierre, and Alexei Protas. Unfortunately, the trio has not shown the same level of chemistry and cohesion as the other lines. In addition, 3 forwards on the roster bubble, including Andrew Cristall, Ivan Mirshnyshenko, and Jacob Vrana. Remember Jacob Vrana, the guy that's here on a professional tryout? Will he make the team? Are still competing in the training camp. They are aiming to secure the 13th forward position or even displace a member of the aforementioned trio. If you're an everydayer of the show, I think you know who I'm referring to, but I'll talk about that a little bit later in the next segment. Coach's comments on player evaluations. Coach Carbery commented on the internal competitions, noting that some players have initially stood out, but then regressed, making the evaluation process more challenging. And he spoke about Jacob Vrana in particular, that he has shown greatness, but has also regressed at certain points. I don't think that a player like Dylan McElrath, for example, was ever in the Capitals' master plan of making the blue line. I really don't, but I love his game, always loved his game. A physical player that'll take some of that tough guy pressure off of Tom Wilson. So a lot of storylines to follow. Tomorrow's game, Saturday afternoon against the Bruins, is going to be a very interesting one. Make sure and take some good notes and just take it all in and try to understand this team. I'll have you guys covered, of course, on Monday on my thoughts on the game, but I want to hear your thoughts as well at Dan Caps 218 at Locked On Caps, and tell me who you think after tomorrow's game deserves to make the roster. I don't want to make any predictions. I have some of my favorites in my head, but at the end of the day, tomorrow's game is going to be an interesting litmus test, a measuring stick, if you will, for this team. The one thing I'm hoping is that the Capitals can avoid injuries like we've seen with the Canadiens and the Kings off the top of my head and what that meant. I'm talking Doughty and I'm talking Patrick Laine, definitely changing the fortunes of those teams, at least in the immediate future. All right, so coming up here after the break, we will talk about Andrew Cristall, and it does appear, according to Mike Vogel, that he will be in the lineup on Saturday. What does that mean for Cristall and the Caps? I'll discuss coming up. Hey, NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. And there is a lot of football being played on any given Sunday or Monday or Thursday. And some of those games you're into and some of them you're not. But if you want to pique your interest, how about open up the FanDuel app and put a little bit of money on the game? All of a sudden, those games are that much more exciting. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure and join the Locked On Capitals Insiders. There's a link in the show description. All right, in this next segment here, we are going to talk about Andrew Cristall, and all arrows point to he will be in the game versus Boston. And according to Mike Vogel, and how exciting is that to see what he's going to look like on the big stage against what I perceive to be primarily veterans on the Bruins, to see how he holds up. We've seen how he's played thus far. I think all things considered, he's played very, very well. The second game, Spencer Carbery had some questions about his game a little bit, but it's going to be interesting. Will he make the team? And him making the team and playing the full season on the Capitals, is that what's best for the Capitals and Andrew Cristall? And I'll break that down a little bit more here, talking about Cristall's performance and opportunity during the camp. Cristall, the team's second round pick from the 2023 NHL draft, has demonstrated his offensive prowess, earning him another opportunity to play in Saturday's preseason finale. And it's interesting when you take a look at that. Initially, it was said that Sonny Milano was going to be in there. I think they are really flushing this all out, and they want to get a good look at Cristall to see if he has what it takes. He's expected to join LaPierre and Protas on a line playing on the left side. The rest of the Caps lineup for Saturday's game against the Bruins is likely to reflect the lineup for the opening night. So I think that, like I say, most things in the lineup have been answered. The third line in particular has some questions. I think that there's been some questions about LaPierre as well. Has he played as well, or as what the expectation is? But the biggest thing for sure for me is that third line left wing, and ultimately who gets the job. Talking about Cristall's eligibility and options, this is where it gets a little bit hairy, it gets a little bit dicey, and it's hard to make the right decision. As a 19-year-old who won't turn 20 until February, Cristall is ineligible to play in the AHL this season. His options are to either secure a spot on the Washington roster or return to his Kelowna junior team in the WHL. The Caps have the flexibility to retain Cristall on their roster without affecting his entry-level contract eligibility, as long as he plays fewer than 10 games in the NHL 24-25 season. The big question, the elephant in the room, is do they keep him on the team longer than the 9 games and we get a long look, even though they're worried about that entry-level contract? And for me, I guess how does he play tomorrow against the Bruins? Does he knock it out of the park? Does he score a goal? Does he get assists? Does it look like he is keeping up with the Bruins, who are one of the better teams in the NHL? And then take it from there. He has 9 games to prove what he has. And ultimately, that's where I'm at right now. I don't want to jump to any conclusions. Let's see where he's at after 9 games. But I know that the Capitals have to be cautious of affecting that entry-level contract eligibility just based on that, because if it's more than 9 games, if he plays 10 or more games, then that is affected. But for me, if he plays very well, then I'm not too concerned about it, to be honest with you. And I just think at this point, at 19 years old, I think that he has evolved past playing for the Kelowna Rockets. I know that his age wouldn't indicate that, but his skill set does. And sometimes I think that there's never the right time to do it, but that is my stance on it. Let's just see what he has. Let's see what he has in this last game versus Boston. Let's see if he makes the final cut. And then if he does, in fact, make the final cut, they have 9 games to really drill down if he is the guy for the job. So then the question is what about Jacob Vrana? Well, in my estimation, he will be the extra skater that will be a healthy scratch. Now, if you're asking me, I'm fine with that. I think that Jacob Vrana, in a lot of ways, just based on how his career has gone the last few years here, that's where he's at. If he gets an NHL contract, he should view that as a victory. And if he's a healthy scratch, one of the things that we know is there is injuries for one, and number two, inconsistent play. So I think that if in fact he does make the team, which is kind of my hunch, is that he will get an opportunity sooner than later. So that is how I think that's all shaking out on the third line in particular, because I think that Jacob Vrana could also be that third line as well, third line left wing. Miroshnichenko is also in that category as well. Talking about comparisons with the LaPierre situation, as he dealt with this not too long ago himself at the beginning of the 21-22 season, the Caps retained LaPierre, who was 19 at the time, on the roster for the initial weeks of the regular season. In a similar manner, LaPierre played 6 games, scoring his first NHL goal on opening night against the Rangers before being sent back to the junior club in the QMJHL. So if history is any lesson, we'll get a good look at Andrew Cristall. If he knocks it out of the park, say he scores a few goals or something crazy like that, or is getting assists, and his skating and his engagement is there, then hey, anything is on the table. Maybe he'll make the team, but say that what we've seen kind of fades a little bit or is slightly lackluster once he faces off against true NHL talent, then maybe the best option is to send him back to Kelowna. Ultimately, I want to say that the ball is in his court. In a lot of ways, it is. It depends on how he's going to play on Saturday, and then if he makes the cut, how he plays in those subsequent games. But all things are looking up for Mr. Cristall. While the Capitals could potentially follow a similar path with Cristall, they might be hesitant to risk losing another valuable player to waivers to keep the young talent in Washington for a short period. Nevertheless, Cristall has made a strong impression and is anticipated to play again on Saturday. So that is how it's looking. And, everything is subject to change. I might come to you guys tomorrow on Twitter saying, hey, that was how it was sketched out, but there's been a change of plans. As I record this at 9:30 Eastern, that's how it's shaken out. Cristall's performance in the preseason, and ultimately, how did he get right here? Defying expectations and odds, he appeared in 1 preseason game last fall and 3 in this year's camp, registering a point in all 4 games, 2 goals and 2 assists. If he delivers another impressive performance against Boston, he could provide the Caps, who faced offensive challenges at times last season, with a compelling reason to consider retaining him. Again, it's a storyline to follow. The anticipation, the excitement is palpable, almost something that I haven't felt in quite some time. Is this young guy going to make the team? And if you are, more of a long time everydayer of the show, I had this excitement the season before when I said that it had to be the year for Connor McMichael. As it was, all things considered, Connor McMichael killed it. I think that Cristall has that raw potential, and I think we need to look past the point that he's 19 years old and how is he going to do. The only thing to be leery of a little bit is that entry-level deal, and if he plays more than 9 games, those kind of things, those are all things to consider. So it's going to be a tough question. It's ultimately up to Cristall on how he performs and what the Capitals plan on doing as far as roster cuts are concerned. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about 2 players that were waived, but ultimately, why were they waived? I'll discuss straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So 2 players got waived today, and some questions, and some people are like, I saw it coming. I was one of those, is that Ethan Bear and Sgarbossa got waived. And ultimately, what was behind that? That is the question. And for Bear, I know that they didn't cite his play as being the reason that he was waived, but I still think there is a lot of questions surrounding him. And in my heart of hearts, I don't think he makes the final roster or at least has a regular role on the team. The Capitals have been actively shaping their final roster as the deadline approaches. Their training camp roster, which initially consisted of 27 healthy skaters, has undergone further adjustments. In a recent move, defenseman Ethan Bear and forward Mike Sgarbossa were placed on waivers on Friday. Sgarbossa, we know, played a pivotal role for the Capitals, stepped up and played a huge role for the Capitals last season. But the Capitals made some moves, this offseason. And where does he fit in? When you take a look at the centers, where would he fit in? When you have Strome, you have Dubois, Lapierre, and Dowd. Injuries, I definitely think he could be the next man called up if called upon. If both players clear waivers, they are set to be assigned to the AHL Hershey Bears. So I think that answers a lot of the questions. And, when I say the questions, is it a temporary thing? Is Ethan Bear joining the AHL's Hershey Bears? Is that a temporary thing? Or is that the plan for him if in fact he clears waivers? As of right now, like I said, there has been no official word on if he clears. But, you take a look at Ethan Bear. He is the guy that has not really lived up to what we had hoped. There was a lot of hype. There was a lot of hula surrounding him, like, oh my God, the Capitals got this really great blue liner, but has not really lived up to expectations. But talking about his situation in general, it's been tricky for him. I'm not going to be too hard on him. Ethan Bear, who contributed 2 assists and maintained an even plus-minus rating throughout 3 preseason games, is in the process of regaining his form after facing challenges at the end of the previous season. His absence was due to the involvement in the NHLPS player assistance program. As the Capitals make these roster decisions, the team and its fans are closely following the developments as they anticipate the composition of the final roster. So Ethan Bear, like I say, I just don't see where he would fit in. I think there are more qualified players. Again, if he does in fact clear, then I think that, he will play in Hershey. But I also think that he will be one of the guys called up if needed. So the biggest reason for placing Bear on waivers, the Capitals have decided to place Bear on waivers as a strategic move to clear cap space. As we know, it's all about money at the end of the day, which will enable them to optimize their salary cap and remain compliant with the regulation. This action was taken in conjunction with placing TJ Oshie on long-term injured reserve, joining Nick Backstrom in his status of being on the LTIR. So it is a thing to clear cap space. To send him to Hershey. The biggest thing is if he does in fact clear, because, there probably are teams out there that are looking for defensemen. Some people will say, hey, I bet you I can get a whole lot more out of that player. Sometimes that's the case. I just don't. He's kind of been a round peg in a square hole, I think, with his time with the Capitals. A limited, albeit time. Mike Sgarbossa's contributions, I think that he has played admirably for the Capitals. During the previous season, Sgarbossa contributed to the stability of the team in Washington and continued to do so in the current preseason. He played in 4 preseason games, providing guidance to the team's emerging wingers while serving as a veteran center. So I kind of see him scheduled to be playing in Hershey as well. Thank you for your contributions, and you'll get an opportunity to get called up when injuries arrive. The Caps have waived Bear and Sgarbossa, leaving the roster with 27 healthy skaters. Vrana, Cristall, Miroshnichenko, Alexiev, McElrath are still in contention for full-time roles at the NHL level. So, Miro's one of those guys that I haven't heard a whole lot of buzz about from, different people covering the team or from Spencer Carbery, that I think that he has played well. But has he played as well as Cristall? And then you have to factor in Jacob Vrana as well. Listen, I think that Miro has played well. I just kind of my hunch, have you ever had just like a hunch like this is how it's going to happen, is that Miro will at least start the season playing in Hershey. But another guy that definitely could get a call up if the time calls for it, if injuries or inconsistent play. So what is the roster going to look like Saturday? As of right now, it'll be Ovi, Strome, and Mangiapane on the top line. Again, it seems to have worked. Not necessarily how I had it sketched out. Second line, Connor McMichael, Pierre-Luc Dubois, and Tom Wilson. Third line, the big question, Andrew Cristall, Hendrix Lapierre, and Alexei Protas. That's the big question there. And the fourth line is nailed down. Duhaime, Dowd and Radish, with Dowd being that leader on that fourth line at the center position. Just, when he speaks, people listen. So let's talk about the D pairings. It'll be Jacob Chikrin and John Carlson on the top pairing, Martin Faravari and Matt Roy on the second pairing. And then I guess a little bit more questions surrounded there for me, but that's kind of how I have it sketched out right now. That you take a look at it. There still are players in flux. You take a look at the fact that there is Alexeyev, and you take a look at McElrath, but kind of my hunch there is that it's going to be on that third pairing, Martin Faravari and Matt Roy. Again, excited to see what Matt Roy has in the tank. I think that he is going to be that guy that alleviates a lot of that pressure off John Carlson, and Martin Faravari is that physical guy. He was the guy that led the team last season in large part in hits, so he is a bit of that bull in the china shop. So I like what they have. As far as the blue line, I think it's in a pretty good position. In net, it'll be Charlie Lindgren and Logan Thompson. Also in that mix on the blue line is Rasmus Sandin and Trevor Van Riemsdyk. So when you take a look at it, that's what I'm talking about with Ethan Bear, is where is he going to fit in to accommodate that? I think everything is pretty nailed down on the blue line, but what is some of the things that we know, like I've talked about in the show, is that injuries are something that happen. Count on it. It's good that you have that depth. And if in fact Bear does clear and he plays in Hershey, that he's there. Or if it's just cap compliance and they do have him on the big team, there's a lot of moving parts. But that is how it is all laid out right now. It's going to be exciting tomorrow to see a lot of the big names out there. And this is pretty much going to be the team that is going to be on the ice the following Saturday against the New Jersey Devils. So hope for a big win, hope for some cohesion and chemistry, and let's hope for a big win. I think going into the start of the regular season off the final preseason game with a big win, I think would start that positivity snowball building and this team headed in the right direction. All right. Once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals and making it your first listen of the day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On 2024 NHL season preview on Locked On NHL, a 6-episode series bringing you the best local insight to make you the most informed NHL fan heading into the season. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again on Monday.